I think for the first time, John, we've got a few viewers, which is really the first time. So welcome everyone. So John and I, we normally decide at the last minute what we're going to talk about, and we certainly don't prepare much. Um, and we often start by sharing any new insights or thoughts we've had about conversational leadership um, over the previous week. And usually there's not a lot. But I thought that we would kind of delve in this week and talk more about how we see it, because I know we do see it. There's a lot we have in common, but there are also differences, which is
Mm.
good. It's the differences that make the dialogue, make the conversation. So I've got some new thoughts. Actually, I've got some very new thoughts from just in fact, just these last few days. I've come across a gentleman, Rupert um, Wegorif. He's a professor of education at the University of Cambridge, who talks a lot and has written a lot, and I guess it's his whole life, about dialogical education. And I can see how his work relates to our work. And I'm trying to get my head around his work so I can relate it to our work. But I can maybe talk a little bit about that later. But let's kick off. John, what's how do you see conversational leadership?
Mm.
Breadth and depth.
Such a big one, right? And we spent years pulling together that book.
Yeah, yes, of
So
course, you
yeah,
have the
let's
book.
see.
Yeah,
I should probably just pull it off the shelf and read it.
you should indeed.
Um,
Isn't it that behind you on the shelf? I can see it on the
that's
shelf.
the one, yeah,
Yeah, that's the
right
one. Yeah.
there. Yeah, with a few fun. I've got my Wimbledon bookmark in it from my last trip to Wimbledon.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Wimbledon ticket. Yeah, it's fun to try and remember. Like, I couldn't even tell you the year. What would you say? We're between 5 and 10 years ago when we sort of first started talking about it, probably seven, eight.
It's at
Is that?
least 7 or 8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to take myself back to 7 or 8 years ago, and I remember some of the earliest conversations were um, thinking about our work lives and how not all, but most of our supervisors and bosses were basically, pretty traditional in terms of like telling us what to do. And then we'd go off and do something and come back and be told, oh, this is not quite right. Go try again. Not every time, but it happened enough that you and I think had said a few times, I can remember bosses that were more conversational. It was more of a co-creation. It was more of a, how about this? How about this? Or let's try this. And not so much like
Yes.
doing it
Yeah.
together, doing the work together, but it just had a more back and forth feel to it. And frankly, a lot of frustration when there wasn't much back and forth. That
Yes.
was one. I remember the other impetus, you say this one better than I do, but it's more like the Knowledge Cafe spark. But why is it that most meetings I go to, even if it's not just my boss, it's a group of people where it's like, an hour long and 55 minutes of presentation and then a real quick 5 minute Q&A at the end. When, I think you and I were hoping to flip that. 5 minutes of presentation and 55 minutes of not even Q&A, but back and forth. So that type of conversation. That's a little bit of the beginnings for me, and I'll go a tiny bit more and pass it back to you. Similar to what we did in knowledge management, where we separated out what is knowledge, what is management, and then what are the two words together. I remember that being helpful for conversational leadership too, because if you look up, so conversation and leadership, and then the two
Yes.
things
Yeah.
together, if you look up conversation in the dictionary, I struggle. I think the definition falls way short. I think you might be closer to okay with it. The definition I found in one of the big dictionaries was something like an oral exchange between two people. And
Not
it's funny.
even not even 3 or 4 people.
No, exactly.
Just
And
two.
and and only
Yep.
spoken. Like so texting each other is not a conversation or And so yes, I have my funny definition that I know you like to tease me for, but sure, I'll put it out there again. I think if we don't even do conversational leadership yet, just conversation. I think conversation can be oh, what are my exact words? I don't even remember anymore. Uh, an interaction of senses across time and space.
Yeah, that's
Uh-huh. Because I think
almost sounds like science fiction.
it does. And I think you and I can have a live conversation right now, but I also think you and I could get off YouTube and get on our phones and text each other today and a week from now and a month from now, and that would still be a conversation, but you have a much more long-term conversation. Um,
See, I
and
think in its broadest sense, you can have a. No, I don't.
I know you
I
don't.
don't. I was going to say you can have a conversation through a text exchange. It's not a conversation. For me, a conversation has got to be audio. You can have a conversation like we're having now. It's not literally face to face. It's mediated through technology. This is a conversation. I'm texting you on the phone. In a
Yeah.
very, very broad sense, you can call it conversation. But for me, strictly speaking, it's I've got this spectrum of conversation from and you talk about levels of conversation from a very sort of transactional exchange all the way up to the other end that might be kind of called dialogue. It's very rich, very interaction. And if I took that spectrum and I wanted to put a a WhatsApp message exchange, text exchange, it would kind of be off the spectrum.
Off the chart.
It would just be not quite made it, so to speak.
Yep. All right. I could almost agree. I don't know. I've had some good chats, but
Well, you
okay.
think you
So
can have a conversation with the wall,
with the
so
painting, because because I think if I've got a beautiful sculpture, the artist did created the sculpture, and while I'm not talking directly to them, I have feelings, I have thoughts, I have things going on, and
yeah.
so that's what I mean across. Yeah, I know it's strange, but I do.
I
So
I
that
always my response always to you on that is that I'm not so sure you're having a yes, maybe metaphorically you're having a conversation with the well, are you having a
sculpture.
conversation with the sculpture or the sculptor?
Exactly. Yeah.
Or are you really just having a conversation inside your head?
And it also goes back to you talked about the
Well, you
levels.
are,
So,
literally.
Dr. Ed Schein has said, we've said it too many times, but like that level -1 is like bad conversation, like dictatorial. It's not conversation at all. It's a one-way push. But then level 1 conversation is transactional. It's I give you a task, you give me a task. But if you get to level 2 and 3, now you're talking about identity and shared identity. I don't know that you can have that depth of conversation with with a sculpture, but it's quality, it's the level of quality. Anyway,
It's the
so
quality, yeah.
it's hard enough for us to define conversation. So then if we put the two words together, conversational leadership gets even harder. I think, and again, I always feel like I love your words on this, but I'll try first and then you fix it. Something about the under-realized power of conversation.
Yes.
And I would even say, lots of people study communications, lots, not a lot, but few people study knowledge management, uh, study project management, right? You can study these things that sort of are basically based in conversation, and yet there's not a bright light shined on the dialogue,
Yeah.
the
The,
conversational process, the conversational dynamics. It's just sort of literally, when I was lucky enough to earn my PMP, that one of the things they want you to walk away with is literally communicate, communicate, communicate. That's a big deal. Like almost everything is just repeat, communicate 3 times, but they don't show you how. It's just like, just do it. I'm sure you're good at it. Everybody's been talking their whole life. And I
yes.
think what you and I have
Yeah.
found is actually studying conversation and the skill and the back and forth and the co-creation and the disagreement and the conflict, like, and that's maybe the other direction I'll go since I say conflict. I don't think everybody thinks this, but there are plenty of books out there on conflict resolution and having difficult conversations. And I've forgotten this. We used to talk about this 8 years ago. I was always very clear at the beginning that back to your spectrum, there's a whole study of how to have difficult
Yes,
conversations.
exactly.
But I think you and I are talking about there's a million conversations I have in my life that are not that difficult, and I'm still not that good at it.
Yeah, they're not that difficult, but they're still difficult.
Yeah, exactly. So, Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know. I'm probably not helping, so help me out. What is
Yeah.
conversational leadership to you?
Okay. I mean, I started thinking about this and writing about this. In fact, my original plan was to write something about the Knowledge Cafe, um, to really document the Knowledge Cafe well, not just the process, but the ideas behind it and the importance of conversation. And then I thought, well, let's expand that a little. And you've heard me say this before. Let's expand this a little and look at other conversational methods. And so I was starting to look and think more about after action reviews and huddles and open space and I don't know, so many of them. And but the question that kept coming back to my mind is, well, it's all very well having better conversations, and that's where I'd come from. But why? Um, what's the purpose here? Especially as I think, I've been running the cafes for 20 years, and you just made the statement about sort of conversation being, you know, incredibly powerful, but not utilized. Most people don't appreciate the power of conversation, and certainly don't appreciate, say, the power of things like dialogue. And what I ended up sort of coming to the conclusion is that we are facing the so-called meta crisis or so-called poly crisis in this world. So many, so many problems we face, whether it's political. Well, I've only got to look at your country, John, to represents um, the, uh, the totality of problems that the world faces. And then you look on social media and you look at the polarization and the arguments and just some of the sheer nastiness, um, and all the different perspectives, and everyone's got a different view on even on the simplest of issues, and they're right and everyone else is wrong, and it's not moving us forward at all. It's in fact, what social media has done is polarized us. And the whole idea originally was that it was going to bring us together. That was the dream. And it's completely and totally failed in so many ways. So my sort of insight, if you will, was that we're living in a very complex world. And in that complexity, we need to make better sense of it. And how do we make better sense of it? The only way we're going to do that is through conversation, and more specifically through dialogue. And so that was my starting point, that conversational leadership is fundamentally about how we respond to the complexity of the world that we're living in. And this is sort of quite a long way from the sort of stuff we were just talking about, though that is still at the very heart of it. And the other point here as well, I guess the second point is that it's very easy when we see the problems in the world to blame, well, all sorts of problems. We can blame the government, we can blame politics, we can blame Donald Trump, we can blame
Blame ourselves,
we
each
can blame our
individual.
parents,
Mm.
we can blame big tech. There's a lot of people that we can blame, but it always seemed to me that we we needed to take responsibility as individuals for the things that we can take responsibility for, if you like. So, there's probably very little that you or I can do to influence the Ukrainian war. But on the other hand, there are things much closer to home that we could take responsibility for. Um, and again, the whole idea that you don't necessarily need authoritative power to make a difference. You can make a difference through influence. And how do you influence people? How do you go about that? Again, you do it through conversation. You do it through dialogue. Sure, you need people who are also open to dialogue. I mean, you can't have a dialogue or conversation with somebody who basically wants to kill you. Um, but for most problems aren't as sort of existential as that. Um, so that was sort of for me the second part of it was taking responsibility for the things that we could do, and influencing the world for the better through conversation. Um, so again, I'm still not getting down to the um, whole idea of having better conversations. And of course, the other part of this, you just talked about conversation and what was conversation,
Hmm.
um, which is fine. I pretty much agree with most of that. But the other part is what is leadership? And of course, again, tying into all of this, most people see leadership as a position of authority.
Hmm.
That you can't lead without authority, and I think they conflate management and leadership. And the big insight for me was listening to people like Ron Heifetz at Harvard, where and Stephen Covey as well, saying that leadership is not a position of authority; it's a practice. Anybody who chooses to lead can lead. So, in the sense of those two words, conversation and leadership, um, leadership there is not about position of authority. It's about practicing leadership through conversation. And then there's that lovely quotation that we both love from Patricia Shaw, where she says, "Can you remember the exact words now?"
You've got the closer, but I always translate it to the purpose. One of the key purposes of leadership is to convene conversations that otherwise
That's
wouldn't
it.
have happened.
That's it. Yeah, yeah. And actually, just 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 that alone is kind of like a little kernel right at the center of
Hmm.
conversational leadership. If each and every one of us, all of you folks out there listening in, just think about it for a minute. What conversation in your organizational life, in your business life, or even in your personal life that you should be having, or the company or the family should be having, and you haven't thought about it or you're avoiding it. Think about it. Think about that conversation, and you've got the power, you've got the authority to initiate the conversation. There's very few people who can actually stop you having a conversation, or at least trying to initiate the conversation. So again, for me, it's a big part of it. And yeah, and then at the center, that's having initiated the conversation, having decided that you're going to take responsibility, having decided to initiate conversations that otherwise happen. Then how do you go about that? Um, and that's a skill. So there are skills, there are habits, there are methods, and that's kind of the heart of the.
We've never really talked about that, but maybe that's if I'm not jumping in too fast.
No, no, fine.
Initiating a conversation. I think we spend a lot of time talking about the ongoing discourse conversation, but there's actually a beginning, a middle, and an end. How do you initiate a conversation? How do you keep it going? And I
Yeah,
would dare say, how do you close? How do you finish? How do you resolve certain, not maybe not the conversation, but resolve the issue in the conversation? That could all be part of it. We haven't talked much about
that's
that
an
before.
interesting way of looking at it.
The other
Now,
stuff we'd be remiss to not mention, I had to write it down so I don't forget either, is, we've built that the egg diagram, the
oh, the egg,
the
yes,
the framework, which,
yeah.
neither one of us are 100% happy with, but it's something. And I don't have it all memorized, which I should, but it's in the center of the egg, it's use of self, which is like, do you understand yourself and intentional choices that you're making? And then the other side that helps the egg roll forward is community ship, which is a whole concept maybe we should
Okay,
talk
maybe
about in a
it's both,
second.
yes.
Working together in community, and then around in the center too, there's four things. Let's see if I remember them. It's like in this particular conversation, just right now, what's the purpose? What's the design? What are the enablers? And what's the process? I'm probably messing up the fourth one. But anyway, that's all in our model. And then one of the things we dislike or that's missing from our model is that's pretty over focused on the current conversation that you're involved in. And you and I have both totally agreed that conversational leadership is also about what's the word that Joel taught us? The discourse. You talked about the Ukrainian war. So, there's a million conversations that add up to that war. So almost like ripple effect or butterfly effect. What conversations were we a part of or weren't we a part of that bubbled up to that? or not. But that general discourse, the conversations that kind of go on in the conversation and between the conversations. I
So,
think you and I want.
something we haven't talked about much, and that's concept of it's not my concept. I think the original guy was a guy called I think it's Oaksheaf. The Great Conversation,
Hmm,
basically his way of looking at the whole of the world and the whole of history as one long conversation.
mhm.
And again, you can maybe look at sub conversations. So the scientific community has been having a conversation, um, and then as conversationalists, if we identify as like I identify as a scientist, although I'm not a scientist, so I can talk to you or talk to other people about various aspects of science. I'm continuing that great conversation. Um, we're moving this conversation. So science is another communication of facts. It's a continuing conversation. It's alive. Knowledge is alive in that sense.
And math is
And
for
math
me
the same.
easy to see the conversation of math, and then throw in the ones that are harder to hear: systemic racism, climate change, geopolitics. Like
Yeah.
it's a
They're
conversation.
all conversations.
Hmm.
This gentleman at Cambridge, Professor Rupert Wegewith, he talks about different voices, and by that he means different perspectives. And so, and again, he talks also about what he calls dialogic spaces. So, in terms of thinking and moving things forward, he says we need to. So, a dialogical space, if you like, is sort of that metaphorical space where there are lots of different perspectives and lots of different questions. And he's saying what we need to do if we're trying to tackle some of these big issues is expand and deepen that dialogical space by inviting other voices, other perspectives into the conversation. So he's saying we should be, in some ways, we should be trying to close it down and make decisions and decide things and turn things into fact. This should be an ongoing conversation, probably for the rest of humanity's existence. Because actually, that's probably true for the really complex issues. We are never going to resolve them, and as we do respond to them in some way, they're going to change, and we're going to have to adapt to those changes. So he's talking about it as an again the great conversation again, an ongoing
Hmm.
conversation, and making sure that we don't close things down, that we do invite in all those other perspectives, other voices from people who are alive today and people, hey, I mean, Socrates and Plato and the likes have a huge influence on the world today, which is quite amazing when you think they've been dead for a couple of thousand years.
I remember thinking when you and I started talking about this, I went back and read or at least glanced at the Republic, and you and I like look at what conversations look like because there's that whole other discipline called conversational dynamics, I think,
Yes.
where they literally look at like how many words you said, how many words I said, what words did I put inflections on? They put little carrots over the words.
Mm-hmm.
There's like math to a conversation, and I think I know I'm less interested in sort of that side of it. But if you go back to like the conversational dynamic of the Republic, it was basically, he went back and forth with himself. Here's a point, here's a counterpoint. Here's a point to prove that counterpoint. Here's another counterpoint. Here's a point to prove that. And it went on for hundreds of pages. So it was this very like attempting to be factual as if you were digging underneath the
Mm-hmm.
facts. And I think, yeah, right now you and I are probably doing a little bit of that, but I think the point I'm trying to make is there's infinite conversational dynamics that are possible. Are you
Yes,
aware of the choices you're making, and are you seeing the process? Are you seeing how the conversation is going so that maybe your next conversation might go a little bit better?
that's a big part of what we've talked about in the past, and that's while you're having a conversation, do you remain aware of the conversation? Because most of the time, we both do this. We get so caught up in the conversation, we're not particularly aware of what we're saying, what the other person's saying. It's as if we're on a slide going down a mountain. There's no way of stopping it.
and we're in separate slides. Like
Yes, yes, I
every
know.
once in a while looking over and seeing if you're still there.
I think we've gone on beyond
We've
our,
gone past. We
even though we
started a little
started
late, but
late, we've gone
yeah.
beyond our 30 minutes.
Yeah.
I I think we should do this again maybe next week. Um, because there's so much there. Um, again, well, I said, I started out just wanting to document the knowledge cafes. It's kind of exploded. And I say this work I've discovered just this last week by accident, about dialogic education is a whole new area that I never ever contemplated or thought about. And there's a lot of thinkers out there from the past. Um, people like Martin Buber, and a few others whose names I never remember. Sort of philosophers, dialogic philosophers that have got a lot to say about
And Boober's so close because I think
conversation.
isn't Boober, I think is I it, I thou,
That's
something
right.
like that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And then yeah, my kids in school both have done Socratic circles.
Oh, okay. Good.
And I get excited, like, oh, so they're attempting, teachers are trying to set up a conversational space. I don't want to put words in my own kid's mouth, but I'm pretty sure neither one of them really cared for it much. So
Oh,
we'd have
that's
to like
interesting.
unpack like you and I have talked about this too. Maybe you and I love learning and love conversations and dialogue. I don't know.
Well,
It feels
we've had this conversation before where some people, maybe because of the way they've been educated, to be honest, they like to be told, they like to be taught, they like to sit and listen. They don't want to engage in the conversation. They they don't want to share their views or their perspectives. And I think a lot of the time it's out of fear because somebody might just disagree with them. But we should be happy. We should be over the moon when someone disagrees with us, because hey, here's an opportunity for a good conversation. But
Mm,
you're right, though. Some people don't enjoy that,
mm.
and maybe that's a big part of what conversation leadership is about: is making it more fun.
All right.
Let's stop there, shall we, John?
Yep.
For those of you still out there, I hope you've enjoyed this session. This is probably the first session that we've had where we've had more than
11 viewers.
one listener. So
Mhm.
a big thank you for this is our 13th. So 13th usually meant to be unlucky, but in this case, hey, we've got a few listeners. So a big thank you, and maybe see a few of you more next week.
Sounds good.
Okay, all the best.
Bye.